Welcome back to the channel, and this week we have one simple goal in mind: revenge. If you watched my vlog last week, you saw that my new goal was to be profitable at the three main locations I play at, which are Capital Casino, Thunder Valley, and the good old Stones Gambling Hall. Capital Casino is covered for now, but we definitely have some work to do at the other two spots. Before last week's session, I was down exactly $900 at Stones Gambling Hall in just 10 hours of play, and to quote the legendary Charles Barkley,
"That's terrible."
But we had a solid session and booked a $645 win, cutting the deficit down to just $255. So the goal is pretty simple this week: complete my revenge mission and profit at least $256, then get the hell out of Dodge. Let's see what we can pull off. But before we get there, I want to announce that I'll be hosting my first ever free roll tournament on the Club GG app. It'll start at 6 p.m. Pacific time the first Monday of every month, and it's a winner-take-all event. $100 in bragging rights to whoever secures the victory. This is the perfect opportunity to build a bankroll from nothing and earn some free money with no risk to you. I'll also be hosting my Monday 50-cent $1 $100 meetup game at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time, and I'll give a $100 bonus to the highest stack. So if you want a chance at all this free money I'm giving away, click the Club GG link in the description, and in order to get the invites, you have to sign up using my reference code. For day 2 of our revenge tour, we're back at Stones Gambling Hall in Citrus Heights, California, and we buy in for our usual $500 starting stack at the 1-3 match stack game. The first interesting hand of the day starts off with us being in the worst position possible, which is none other than the small blind. The $6 straddle is on, and 3 people call the $6 before I look down at ace-jack of spades. Since I'm going to be out of position the entire hand and don't want to play in a super multi-way pot, I decide to size up to $35, and we get what we want when just the cutoff puts in the call. So we're going heads up to a flop of 10-9-3 with 2 clubs. On a pretty neutral board like this, I usually like to start off with a c-bet to keep the aggression and set up either a value bet or a bluff on the turn. The only strong hands he should have on this board is 10-9 or pocket 3s, since I'd assume most 1-3 players are raising pocket 9s and pocket 10s pre-flop. So given that, I throw out another bet of $35 and our opponent pretty quickly calls. We doubled the pot to $140 and the turn comes out the king of spades. This card really doesn't do anything for our specific holding besides give us a gut shot to Broadway, but it's the perfect scare card to represent. I could have queen jack, king 10, pocket kings, and ace king that all play this way, so my goal is to size up a bit and get him to fold all his 10x hands and most of his small flush draws. So I throw out a pretty solid bet of $80, and he wastes no time before tossing his hand in the muck, and we start off day 2 with a successful bluff.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
We look to keep the action going in this hand and throw on the $6 straddle. Under the gun 1 puts in the call, and so does the low jack before the button raises to just $15. If I'm being completely honest, I've never picked up a successful physical tell in my life, but one thing I've noticed throughout the years is live players have a ton of sizing tells. This guy just made it $15 after 2 $6 limps, which is almost always weakness. He probably has a hand like pocket 6s or 10-9 suited trying to bloat the pot but keep position. Well, when it folds to me in the straddle and I look down at the very subpar queen 10 offsuit, all I see is $31 of dead money out there that I want in my stack. So I throw in the 3-bet bluff to $65, hoping everyone folds, but out of nowhere, the early position limper puts in the cold call. The low jack folds, and our sizing tell was spot on because the button folds as well. But now it's time to put the early position player on a range of hands. In my experience, the early position limp cold call is almost always suited aces or small pocket pairs, rarely anything else. So with a pretty shitty hand, we're going heads up out of position to a flop of ace-10-5 rainbow, giving us middle pair. There's $150 in the pot, and now it's decision time. Since we put our opponent on an ace or a small pair, I think it's fine to check to see what he does, but my live thoughts were if I check to him, it looks like that I'm scared of the ace, which I obviously am, and he could turn a small pair into a bluff. But if I throw out a bet and he calls, I'll just give up, but if I bet, it'll look like I have a strong hand and he won't be able to pull off a bluff. So I go with the latter and throw out a super small feeler bet of $45, and our opponent doesn't think twice before mucking his hand right away and saying he had pocket sixes. Don't really know if my thought process is right for this hand, but I'm never going to shy away from giving you guys my live thoughts. If there's one thing I do know about my poker logic, it's that
sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit.
But unfortunately for us, we go card dead for an hour straight, basically folding a ton of hands and losing a couple small pots, so we're only up $10 on the day. We then see middle position open up the action to $20 over a $6 straddle, and I'm next to act and look down at king queen of clubs. I should probably be 3-betting this holding, but since this player doesn't raise too often, I decided to take the passive route and just stick in the call. The cutoff calls as well, so we're going 3 ways to a flop with $60 in the pot, and the board comes out 10-4-4 rainbow with 1 club. The pre-flop raiser now checks, and he seems like a pretty straightforward player, so I don't think he has much. I figured this is a perfect hand to start a bluff with because we have backdoor, straight, and flush opportunities. So I throw out a half-pot bet of $30, and if I get called, I could put a ton of pressure on our opponents with a club, jack, queen, or king, but both players decide to toss their hands in the muck. Obviously not a significant pot, but winning these small pots will pay dividends in the long run, and it's important to bluff with the right combination of cards. A ton of players were adding on, and the game is playing huge today, so I decided to join the party and reach into my wallet and add on $500, so we're now into the game for $1,000 even. After losing a couple insignificant pots, we're right under the even mark, but looking to change that when we get dealt the good old pocket tens. We raise them up to $25 over a limp, and the button and the limp are put in the call, so with $80 in the pot, the flop comes out king 10-6 with 2 clubs giving us middle set. Since this is such a connected board, there's no way I'm checking this and allowing my opponents to get a free card on the turn, so I throw out a value bet of $35 and just the button puts in the call. I think he could have queen jack, a weaker king like king 9 or king jack, and all the flush draws. So with $150 in the pot, the turn comes out the 7 of clubs, bringing in the front door flush. I should probably be betting here, but I figured since the front door flush came in, I couldn't get called by much worse, which is why I decided to check. Button checks it back, and the river comes out to 7 of spades, pairing the board and giving us a full house. Missed draws obviously aren't calling, and all his flushes would have bet the turn, so he either has queen jack for the missed straight or some type of king. Not wanting to lose him if he does have a king, but still wanting decent value, I decide on a value bet of $100, but he snap folds and we scoop in a decent little pot. My only regret was I should have sized up way bigger on the flop since I unblocked top pair. It's important to get your value early against draws. Definitely putting that in my notes for future hands. For this next one, I put on the $6 straddle, and there's 3 limps to me before I look down at ace-3 of hearts. Instead of raising, I decided to just check my options since I wanted to see a cheap flop out of position. So with $20 in the pot, the flop comes out ace-queen 9 with 1 heart, giving us top pair and a backdoor flush draw. I decided to start off with a check, and now the under-the-gun limper bets out for a pot-sized bet of $25. Folds over to me, and I'm not going anywhere, so I throw in the green chip. So we're down to heads up, and the dealer puts out the 10 of hearts turn, giving us the nut flush draw. I check him flow, and he decides to check it back now. Knowing this opponent, I don't think he would slow down with an ace on this draw-heavy board, so I'm pretty sure I have the best hand. And when the river comes out the ace of clubs, I'm now almost 100% certain I have the winner. So I decide to target a queen and throw out a small little bet of $20, and our opponent eventually puts in the call and mucks his hand after we turn over the winner.
Lead a 3 to great.
After that hand, we lost some money raising ace-king and trying to steal it with the bluff, so our stack is currently sitting at $1,060. To complete the challenge and get positive at stones for 2024, we just need to profit another $196, so let's try and make it happen. So for this one, there's 3 limps from the cutoff, small blind and big blind, and I'm in the straddle and look down at 5-3 of diamonds and check my option. With $22 in the pot, we get an amazing flop of 10-5-3 with 2 spades giving us bottom 2 pair. I'm not letting this one get checked through, especially on a draw-heavy board, so I lead out for $16 and get 2 calls from the small blind and big blind. 3 ways to a turn, and we get the jack of diamonds, making this board a lot more connected. Checks to me again, and now it's time to size up. I need to charge all the draws and get value from the one pair holdings, so I throw out a pot-sized bet of $65 and just the small blind puts in the call. The pot is sitting at $200, and we get the best river in the deck and the 5 of hearts giving us a full house. Small blind checks again, and at this point I think he has a ton of draws that miss, so I decide to implement something I've never done on this vlog and throw out a blocker bet of $25. This bet accomplishes 2 things. It gives our opponent an amazing price to call with all his shitty holdings, but it also makes our hand look weak and incentivize our opponent to raise with all his missed flush draws, since that's the only way he could win. But unfortunately for us, our opponent tosses his hand in the muck and he doesn't fall for our trap.
Never once I hit a 2048.
But after winning with the shitty holding, we get our stack up to $1,175 and we're only $81 off our goal. For this one, we see 4 people call the $6 straddle, and I look down at ace-10 offsuit in the big blind. I would usually just call the extra $3 to see a cheap flop, but these guys have been limping super wide, so I'm pretty sure I have the best hand, and when that's the case, a raise is definitely in order. I make it $60 hoping to get action from a worse ace and achieve our goal right now, but they all fold.
Easy game, easy game.
So we got our stack all the way up to exactly $1,200 and we just need to win $56 more before we could successfully complete our revenge at Stone's Gambling Hall. But the problem is 2 o'clock is quickly approaching, which is when we always leave, so if it's gonna happen today, it needs to happen fast because it's 1:58 p.m. So for our last interesting hand of day 2, we're gonna consider this next one the parking lot hand because I'm either going home achieving our revenge goal or we have to come back for a day 3 to complete the challenge. Early position opens up the action to $15, and the entire session he's been opening his big hands to $20, so I don't think he's too strong. So when I look down at pocket 8s next to act, I decide they're good enough to 3-bet, so I raise the price of poker to $40. But unexpectedly, the button now puts in the cold call, and that usually means pocket pairs or a hand like ace queen or ace jack that's not comfortable 4-betting. The other player calls as well, so we're going 3 ways to a flop, hoping for all low cards, but the flop comes out queen 9-3 rainbow, giving us 3rd pair and a 3-bet pot. Oof. Early position checks, I check, and the button checks it back. The turn gets even worse when the jack of clubs comes out, and the early position leads out for $45. With 4th pair now, I obviously fold, and so does the button, and the early position player said that he had king queen for top pair, which was obviously crushing us. So off to the parking lot we go for the outro. I tried so hard to reach that $255 profit mark, but we just couldn't get there today. In for $1,000 and out for $1,170 for a $170 profit. Even though we didn't reach our goal yet, we've made some amazing progress and have profited $815 in just 2 sessions over 8.5 hours of play. We're now only down a measly $85 at Stone's Gambling Hall for 2024, so let's see if we could pull off a 3rd straight win. So we're back for day 3, and when I pulled up in the building, there was only 2 games going. 1-1-2 game and another 1-3, and as you guys know, I'm obviously a 1-3 player now, but I think a key factor to being a profitable poker player is to pick the game with the most action regardless of the stakes. The 1-3 game was filled with a bunch of regulars, so I decided to step down in stakes and battle it out at the 1-2 today since the lineup looked good. So for the 1-2 game at Stone's, the max is $300, so that's what we bought in for, and we get the action started right away when we put on the $4 straddle. Everyone folds to the small blind who just calls the $4, and the big blind puts in the extra $2 for the call as well. Throughout the years, I've noticed a lot of 1-2 players hate facing aggression, especially when they've shown weakness by just limping pre-flop, so when I look down at Jack 6 of clubs, I decide to pounce on him and raise the price of poker to $24. When it gets back to the small blind, he folds right away, and the big blind does as well. So we take down $8 of dead money. It's super important at the 1-2 games where there's a high rake to scoop in the dead money pre-flop against weak opponents because that's $8 in profit without 1 dime going to the casino. Next hand up, the cutoff limps and an older gentleman raises to $6 on the button, and I'm in the small blind and look down at 9-8 of clubs. I would usually 3-bet or fold from the small blind, but I don't have a feel for the table yet, and when an older guy raises at the 1-2 games, I tend to give them a pretty strong holding. So I decided to just put in the call, and so does the cutoff. With $13 in the middle, the flop comes out 9-8-5 with 2 spades, giving us top 2 pair. Another note about older guys is they don't usually like betting with overpairs on these types of boards, so I take the betting lead myself and throw out a pot-sized bet of $13. To my surprise, both the players put in the call, so with $52 in the pot, the turn is the king of spades, bringing in the front door flush. I'm not loving this card, but I think a value bet is still in order, and we're going to implement the bet fold strategy. The bet fold strategy means if I bet and get raised for a big amount, I could just toss my hand in the muck knowing I'm beat. But if I bet and just get called, I'll most likely still have the best hand and we could get value from worse. So I throw out a half pot bet of $25, but they both fold. For this hand, there's an early position limp, and the same older guy from last hand raises to $8. I haven't seen him take a hand to showdown yet, so when I look down at king jack of spades in the cutoff, I decide to just call instead of 3-bet, assuming he's an OMC. Button calls, small blind calls, and so does the early position limper, so we're going 5 ways to a flop with $40 in the middle, and the dealer puts out a queen jack 10 flop with 1 spade, giving us middle pair and an open-ended straight draw. The early position limper now leads out for $15, original raiser calls, and given the players involved, I think the only move is to call since I don't think middle pair is good right now. The small blind calls as well, so we're down to 4 players with exactly $100 in the pot, and the turn comes out the beautiful ace of diamonds, giving us the straight and putting 2 diamonds on the board. The early position limper continues the aggression for $25. The older original raiser calls again, and now it's decision time. The early position limper has about $100 left in his stack, and the original raiser only has about $30. So I think the only move is to go all in and hope the board doesn't pair and we're not getting free rolled by a king x of diamonds hand. The early position limper decides to toss his hand in the muck, so he must have had 2 pair that wasn't willing to risk his stack, but now the original raiser snap calls. I turn over my hand like I always do when I'm all in, and we go to a river, which is one of the worst cards in the deck, and the queen of clubs pairing the board. I'm waiting for our opponent to turn over a full house, but he turns over ace-6 offsuit for just top pair, and we had him drawing dead on the turn. So our read of him being an OMC was completely off, so we'll definitely take that into consideration going forward. After that hand, our stack has gotten over the $85 mark, and we could walk out ahead to complete the challenge and be profitable at Stone's Gambling Hall for 2024, but that'd be the easy way out, and I don't drive all the way to the casino to hit and run. I always battle it out till 2 p.m. regardless of the results. Next hand up, I raise king jack of clubs in early position to $10 and get calls from the cutoff and small blind. Flop comes out king 7-7 rainbow, and when the small blind checks, I decide to check it back for deception and figure there's nothing I could really get value from that's worse. Cutoff checks as well, and the turn is a 5 of spades, putting 2 spades on the board. Small blind now leads out for a pot-sized bet of $25, and I don't see a point in raising since the only value hand I'm beating right now is king 10, so I decide to just stick in the call and the cutoff gets out of the way. Going heads up to the river with $75 in the pot, we see the deuce of spades bringing in the backdoor flush. He now slows down and checks, and now that the flush came in, I don't think there's any value to be had, so I check it back and our opponent turns over queen jack of spades for the backdoor flush. So we're now only up $155, which is definitely not the direction we want our stack to go. There's 1 limp in early position, and I raise queen jack of diamonds to $10 from the cutoff, and we get the button and the limper to put in the call. With $25 in the middle, we get an amazing flop of ace-king 3 with 2 diamonds, giving us a straight and a flush draw, which is pretty good considering we only have queen high. After the limper checks, I start off with a $10 bet just to see where our opponents stand, and just the button puts in the call. Since he just called pre-flop and just called flop, I think the best holding he could have is a weak ace, since ace-king would have raised pre-flop and ace-3 would have raised on the flop. So with $45 in the middle, the turn comes out the deuce of spades, and now it's decision time. Should I check and try to see a free turn, or should I bet and try to get him to fold all his king X and weak ace hands? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Since I don't want to risk falling below the $85 profit mark, I'm going to check and hope he checks it back.
Psych!
Screw that. It's time to keep bluffing because
Mama ain't ever raised no bitch. Not up in here!
So I grab a stack of $45 to keep the pressure on our opponent, but he ends up snap folding and we win this pot with a bluff. Next up, we look down at a couple of dime pieces under the gun and open them up to $10. Next stack calls, and the old man who we've been battling with in the last several hands jams his short stack for $33. Folds back to me, and if I had pocket queens or better, I'd probably just flat to keep the player in between us in the pot, but I'm not trying to get greedy with a vulnerable pair, especially with $46 of dead money. So I raise to $100 to isolate the all-in player, and next act obviously folds. I turn over our hand like I always do when I'm all in, and we get a flop of 8-7-3 rainbow, which we're pretty happy with. Turn 3 of diamonds, which isn't too bad, and a not so good king of diamonds on the river, but after looking at the board, our opponent tosses his hand in the muck and we scoop in a decent little pot for 1-2. It's nice to carry over momentum from a couple previous sessions, so let's see if we could keep it rolling. Early position opens to $10, and he's a pretty solid player that doesn't get out of line too much, so when next act calls and I look down at ace-9 of spades in the hijack, I decide to just put in the call as well. The cutoff in big blind call as well, so we're going 5 ways with $50 in the pot to a queen 7-5 2-spade board, giving us the nut flush draw. The original raiser now slows down and checks, but now the low jack leads out for $20. He also hasn't gotten out of line all session, so I'm pretty sure he has some type of top pair holding. So given that, I decide to just put in the call, and so does the big blind. The pot's sitting at $110, and the turn comes out the amazing jack of spades, giving us the ace-high flush, which is obviously the best hand possible. And music to our ears because the big blind takes over the betting lead and throws out a pretty big bet of $60. The low jack goes in the tank, but eventually decides to fold, and now we have to decide what the best course of action is. I think the big blind almost always has a flush given this line because a set would have raised on the flop, and queen jack shouldn't be donking into a multi-way pot when the front door flush comes in. So since I have position, I decide to just flat call and not make my hand face up. This is sometimes a risky play because a 4 spade could come on the river killing our action, but it's a risk I'm willing to take. There's $230 in the pot, and our opponent has about $160 left in his stack. We're going to a river and hoping for any non-spade card, preferably a non-board pair either, and that's exactly what we get when the biggest blank in the deck comes out in the 3 of clubs. He throws out the same bet of $60, and even though this is one of my favorite people to play poker with in all of Sacramento, there's one rule in live poker for me.
No mercy.
So I jam all in, and he says if you got it, you got it, and puts in the call. I turn over the bad news, and he turns over king 10 of spades for the ultimate cooler. Nut flush over second nut flush. Hate to do it to a friend of the vlog, but that's the sickness of the game we all signed up for. Thank you. We're up over $520 after that amazing run out and decided to order my favorite dish from Stone's, which is the Mongolian beef topped off with a little sweet and sour sauce. It only cost $12 and it was essentially free because I used all my comped money, so shout out to Sammy's Restaurant for always delivering. And just a little warning, if you thought last hand was crazy, this next one might even be crazier. Action gets folded to me in the low jack and I look down at 8-7 of diamonds and open it up to $10. The hijack puts in the call with the super short stack, but now the cutoff 3 bets to 30. The button now cold calls the $30 and action's back on me. Having now played with the old man in the hijack for a couple hours now, I obviously know he's never folding, so I peek over at his stack to see how much he has, and I counted out about $43 total. And that's great news for us because I could now call the extra $20, and if the hijack jams his short stack, the only option the 3-better would have is to call since the jam wouldn't be enough to reopen the action. So I put in the chips, and as expected, the hijack goes all in for $43. The cutoff only calls, and the button obviously calls, and when it folds back to me, I call as well. So after all that pre-flop craziness, there's already $170 in the pot, and the flop comes out queen 8-5 with 2 diamonds, giving us middle pair and a flush draw. We all check it over to the cutoff, who throws out a continuation bet of $50. He's betting into a dry side pot, so I definitely think he has a value hand. I'm pretty sure a hand like pocket 10s or pocket jacks would probably check given the flop, so I'm putting him on a queen X holding or an overpair. And since we still have some stack depth, I'm not really in the mood to flip for stacks since I have 0 fold equity against those hands. So I decided to just call the $50 since I'm getting a pretty good price to hit one of my 14 outs, but instead we completely whiff when the dealer puts out the deuce of hearts. I check in flow, now the cutoff sizes up and bets $105 with about 65 behind. At this point, there's no way I'm jamming because I obviously have 0 fold equity, so now it's just a matter of calling or folding. I go in a mini tank to calculate my pot odds, which I definitely struggle with in live time. So we bet $105 into 270, so I have to call $105 to win 480. That's basically 1/5, so I have about 20% to make a break-even call, and if he has an overpair or a queen, I still have about 28% against all those holdings. So unless he has a set of queens, a call is definitely the profitable play. So I stick in the chips, and the pot is sitting at $480. River comes out the amazing deuce of diamonds, giving us the flush, and it's time to put our opponent all in. So I jam, he snap calls, and we turn over the winner. He was nice enough to turn over queen jack offsuit for the camera, and unfortunately, but fortunately for us, we stack another friend of the vlog. Something I've never done at a 1-2 game is book a 4-figure win. So that'd be pretty awesome to achieve, especially since I'm filming, and given our stack size, it's definitely a possibility. After a few more orbits go by, our stack is sitting at $1,190, so we're only $110 away from that 4-figure score. I look down at ace deuce of hearts in the low jack, and when action gets folded to me, I open it up to $10. Just the small blind puts in the call, so with $20 in the pot, the flop comes out jack 10-7 with 2 hearts, giving us the nut flush draw. This is a pretty neutral board, meaning that it could favor either of our ranges, so when he checks, I decide to throw out a semi-bluff of $10, but he snap calls. So the pot is doubled to $40, and the turn comes out the 9 of clubs, which is a pretty shitty card. Once he called the flop, this card can give him a ton of 2-pair holdings and some straights, so when he checks it to me, I decide to check it back and see a free river. We're hoping for a heart, but instead we get the ace of diamonds on the river, giving us the worst top pair possible. He checks again, but I don't think I could get called by worse, so I decide to check it back, and he turns over 9-7 of diamonds for 2 pair, and we lose a small one. 2 o'clock has quickly approached, which is when we always leave, so I decided I'm playing one more playable hand before I head out. We need to make $140 to get that $1,000 win, and when I look down at pocket 7s under the gun, I decide to open it up to $10. Folds all the way back to the small blind, who now 3-bets to $50, and I announce to the table,
This is my last hand, so
I put in the extra $40, and if we hit a set or somehow get an overpair, this is definitely a hand that we could win a huge pot with, especially since we're over $400 effective with our opponent. So we're praying for a 7 or at least all low cards, but the flop comes out ace jack 10 with 2 diamonds, and we miss the flop completely. This board crushes our opponent's 3-betting range, so as he starts to assemble chips for a bet, I tell him to bet $1 and I'll fold. He throws out the minimum $2 bet, and I just snap fold. So unfortunately, we couldn't pull off the 4-figure score, but let's head to the parking lot for the outro.
Today's 1-2 session couldn't have gone any better. In for only $300 and out for $1,108 for an $808 win. Safe to say we completed our revenge at Stone's Gambling Hall.
In our 3-session stretch, we had a super fun time battling it out at Stone's. Winning over $1,600 under 12 hours of play obviously helps, but the environment there is super laid back and the food is great. And that 1-2 session was the last in the month of July, so let's go over our results. We played 24 hours and 35 minutes of live poker and profited $1,291 for over a $52 per hour win rate. Wouldn't mind if every month went this way, but unfortunately poker is just never that easy. The Stay tuned for part 3 of the revenge tour when we head out to Thunder Valley Casino to hopefully make up the $726 deficit in a super short time. And as always, I hope you guys run good at the tables, and I'd appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button to help me reach my new year-end goal of 10,000 subscribers.